Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 38 of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights. We'll be taking a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real life fossil counterparts. And today we're going to be doing the other half of that pack, the Aquatic pack that was done by Feilong, and then covering some pretty cool animals. We've got about 4 or so new animals that we're going to talk about in this episode, which I'm quite excited to get into, so quite excited to get stuck into that. So we're going to be starting off today with the rest of the Aquatic pack. We're going to be starting off with Leopleurodon. So we'll let them swim off, so see if you can get them in the good light. And then not in the sarcastic way, in the proper way, get them in the good light. Let's see. We'll let you move out a little bit. Well, this one looks pretty good, but here we can see a great look at these guys. You can see the major edits here are definitely to the head as well. You can see that head's changed quite a bit. A lot of reconstructions of Leopleurodon give it a really crocodile-like snout, but this is much more accurate based on the skull of it and other related plesiosaurs and pliosaurs. They've got actually pretty big eyes, which you can kind of see here, and also they've got this longer, like bulky snout there. It's vaguely similar to a crocodile, but it's very unique. And you can see they've got these quite large teeth here. You can see these interlocking teeth here, especially around the front of the jaw, and then the middle of the jaw here. That's very likely to be able to grab both slippery and larger prey, since these guys are most likely more macro predatory, which means they pretty much ate big things. So they ate probably smaller marine reptiles, larger fish, squids, pretty much whatever they get their mouths around, most likely on that seafood diet, both in terms of whatever they can find and also everything that lives in the ocean, because they live in the ocean too, which is a double entendre pun, which I'm quite proud of. But you can see that really wonderful skull really fits to change and gives that much nicer profile of what Leopleurodon would have actually looked like. We can see some other changes here. The body's been made a lot of leaner, because it was kind of the one a little bit bulky. These guys were not the biggest of the pliosaurs. These guys, especially walking with dinosaurs, had the big 25-meter one. But most specimens of Leopleurodon are actually only about 5 to 6 meters long, which is still a very big animal. That's like the size of a pilot whale or something of that regard, but not the huge 25-meter monster. And the larger pliosaurs are things like Kronosaurus, quote unquote, and some of those later ones from the Cretaceous. They got quite big, up to about 10 to 11 meters long. You can see that long body here, and we can see the flippers here. See the changes there to make it much more hydrodynamic. And then you can see the slightly larger back ones as well. Most pliosaurs had slightly longer and larger back flippers to front flippers. And we're going to start to look at what's wrong with it. You can see the scales are very crocodilian with these osteoderms along the back here, which is not the case in real life. Similar to the Kronosaurus from the last episode, they would have had a very smooth skin to reduce drag in the water, because these guys were very much pursuit predators, most likely, swimming around, or even potentially some sort of ambush predator got to go through the water quickly and as efficiently as possible, so they wouldn't have osteoderms like this. And we have no evidence of that in pliosaurs, so they would have had very smooth skin. Also, these are very turtle-like, obviously, scales here. They wouldn't have had that. It would be all very, very smooth. Also, another thing that's wrong is the tail here. You can see they've got the very much osteoderm-type crocodile design going down here. But in real life, there would have been like most other plesiosaurs and pliosaurs, they would have had a skin flap that kind of goes around here. But yeah, other than that, it's actually pretty spot on. I do like the look of the head. It really, even though it's obviously got a bit of JP-ification to it, it does really represent what the animal actually looked like in life pretty well, especially around the skull area. So I'm definitely a big fan of that. It looks really, really nice. So we're going to let you swim off and do your own thing. See you later, Leopleurodons. More like Leopleurodons or Leopleurodons. But next up, we have got Styxosaurus, another plesiosaur. See if we can. That one needs to swim away a little bit. Here we are. Let's release him. Here's the super long guy, is a Styxosaurus. Let's see if we can get one. You can see we're going to start off with the head. You can see the head's definitely been changed quite a bit. What we have, the species Styxosaurus snowy is like the one that we know the most of, but we have a really great preserved skull, and we can see they've got this very much almost like triangle, this like cone-shaped skull that's quite deep, and I think it's really been reconstructed really well on here. You can see it's got that round shape to it, and they've got these also very large interlocking teeth. So these guys would be eating like squids and small fish, potentially some big things like maybe baby like mosasaurs, things like that. Pretty much anything get their mouths around. I think we often severely like underestimate what these guys would have been eating, because they can obviously rip apart things and things like that. So they would be eating pretty much anything that wasn't too large. So that's also really cool. And you can see, I think the neck's also been elongated. As you can kind of see here, a little bit longer. It would actually look much longer if they didn't have these kind of skin flaps. I get why Frontier wanted to add these skin flaps to give it something unique and not just look like a Elasmosaurus. But they obviously most likely wouldn't have had things like that to reduce drag. But also the skin's actually quite a bit nicer as well. The scales are still too big, and technically, but it's much smoother, and it gives you probably much better what it would look like in life. Much more smoother skin, and maybe reduce some of these skin flaps a bit, but yeah, very much smooth. And we do have a lot of skin impressions from plesiosaurs and pliosaurs. There would have been a lot of fat around these guys potentially, really rounding out that shape to help make them hydrodynamic, and also potentially with a little bit of blubber to help keep them cool in deeper water, which is really, really cool. See that long body there. Also, yeah, as we mentioned, shouldn't be there. See some changes to the body, since a lot of comparisons for these larger plesiosaurs and things like that, elasmosaurs, they look like a turtle, like with a snake sewn through it, so, which you can kind of see. And I think that looks quite well on this guy as well. And you can also see that tail there. That tail's been changed a bit with that little fin. That's what it would kind of look like on the Leopleurodons over there. This little fin, the skin flap. You could call it a fluke even, potentially, but that's usually reserved for like whales and mammals that have flukes, like dugongs, things like that. But yeah, I think that came out rather nicely, and you can see some changes to the flippers. They've got very much triangular flippers, much bulkier than they were originally, you can see here, and very hydrodynamic. So these guys would have been using these large flippers to help glide them through the water, which is quite interesting. And often due to and we often have these impressions because of, as I mentioned, like that show the outline of the animals. We often very much under soft tissue, under muscle, a lot of them. So they would have had very powerful muscles and a lot of skin to create that shape to allow them to better move through the water. And you can see that quite well reconstructed on here, and it looks really, really nice. Definitely a big fan. And we can also see that bioluminescence on this skin, which is pretty awesome. I do like that. We don't really have natural bioluminescence on many reptiles, but we do have, I believe, I remember reading this a while ago, there was some sea turtles that have some bioluminescent bacteria growing on their shells that cause them to glow. So you could argue that's kind of the same thing going on here, and I think that's still quite cool. But yeah, I'm a very big fan of how the skull came out. Really, really wonderful. So we can let the Styxosaurus swim off and do their own thing. And next up, we have got another elasmosaur. We got the elasmosaur, Elasmosaurus. So this guy's definitely a long'un. Look at how long he is. We'll have a look at maybe this one, since he's doing an interesting pose. But we can see the changes to their head here. As I keep mentioning, the scales are way too big, and these like crackles, and like almost pseudo larger scales or pseudo osteoderms at the top would not be there. There'd be smooth skin on these guys. We can see some changes to the skull. Unlike the Styxosaurus, Elasmosaurus, you can see it's got that very long skull, and you can see all the muscles there, long and very much good at catching prey with these large interlocking teeth. That means it potentially could mean that these guys had a slightly better adaptation to feeding on softer prey, maybe in particular because of if you look at a lot of animals that eat slippery prey, they tend to have those, like fish and squids. They tend to have those like more interlocking jaws and teeth, a lot more than catching. If you're catching large mammals and things like that, they tend to interlock a little more just to catch, just so it's because it's slippery, you know. But yeah, I really do like these guys. I really love the Elasmosaurus, and it's come out wonderfully. I love the head, perfectly represented, and you can see that longer neck. I think the neck has actually been elongated a little bit from the original one that was in the game, which is so interesting to think they made it even longer. But it looks much nicer, and I like that longer look. Looks much more like the real animal. And then we can see on here the body's been a little bit more rounded. Yep, you can definitely see that. These guys have that very turtle-like body. And these very large flippers you can see here. That looks pretty spot on. I like the a little bit of the shape on it, but you can see that's alright. And you can see on the tail here, it's got a little fluke at the back there. From what we know from some reconstructions, it could have been like very much like a rhomboid shape there. At least based on the skeletal I'm looking at, but we really don't know too much, and there's a lot of variation within tail flukes or tail fins from a lot of different ichthyosaurs, the different plesiosaurs and pliosaurs. There's a lot of variation within them, so it really could be whatever, but I think it's really, really cool, and I think this guy's really come out wonderfully. Feilong, who did the rest of this, all the 4 animals from here and the next one, really did a wonderful job with this pack, and I think really got that anatomy, but also keeping that JP style aesthetic with it. And just a little couple more edits, like maybe some changes to the textures and a little bit of more changes. You could really make things that are pretty much accurate to the real animal, which is pretty cool. But yeah, big fan of these guys. Definitely do love them. Really, really do like this. I love this. Look at that face. Those big teeth. Good for catching squids and belemnites, and really, really awesome. But yeah, really, really wonderful. Don't know what's happening there. A little bit of a issue. But next up here, we have got Tylosaurus. Ooh. Because it was paused, I think. Oh, damn it. We'll have a look anyway. Technical difficulties, everyone. That's alright. See, sometimes, guys, you gotta have those technical difficulties. It's what builds character. But we can have a look at these wonderful guys here. So we've got the Tylosaurus, our last marine mammal. Oh, not marine mammal, marine animal. Don't know why I'm thinking about mammals today. But look at these wonderful guys. So Tylosaurus is a very awesome mosasaur. Not that closely related to, not very closely related at all to a lot of these other marine reptiles. These guys are more related to lizards and snakes. They are a squamate, which is the technical term. But yeah, these guys have come out rather interestingly. You can see the mangled teeth of the original are gone. These guys would have had big reptile lips, as you kind of see here, from skin impressions. And also we know from skin impressions from relatives like Platycarpus and things like that, they would have had very fine scales, very similar to like a lot of snake scales and lizard scales, but they would have been much, much smaller. And so you would probably barely be able to notice the texture throughout the body, and would look smooth or appear smooth on the large animal, because the scales are typically like only a few millimeters long on an animal that's like 10 meters long, so you barely notice them. It only just show up as like a little texture, but you can see the changes to the face here. Tylosaurus also has like a very much a like ramming almost adaptation to the tip of its nose. It doesn't have teeth right up there, right at the tip of its jaw, which is quite interesting. So they may potentially be ram feeding, or could be for like fighting for mates, for example. But you can see very much that kind of cool look. You can see the scales are actually pretty spot on, but they're just way too big, and you can see that all the skin and all that there, and you can see the rounding out of those big flippers there. From what we know from Tylosaurus, they had very big round flippers, being large pursuit predators, and that very long body. You can see it coming back here as well. And then you can see that tail, and could have had a little bit more of a keel, but you can see these guys have very much... originally, Mosasaurs were thought they had a very eel-like tail, so very long. It would have been just really long and eel-like. But more recent skin impressions showed that they had very much like almost like a shark or ichthyosaur-like tail fluke, and they would use that to swim. And that actually gives implications. Oh, I can't even speak properly. Implications to their biology, because they would, instead of being more ambush, these guys potentially a little bit more pursuit predators, so be able to swim a little bit more efficiently through the water. And believe it or not, they only evolved within the last like 30 million years or so of the Mesozoic, around like the later Cretaceous. So they actually got up to this kind of level of water adaptability pretty fast, and have relatives of mosasaurs, or a mosasaur, things like Plotosaurus, which is really reminiscent of an ichthyosaur. So it shows that these guys were able to pretty much jump in the water pretty quick, and they set off running and became really, really big predators, and kind of the top animals of this ecosystems. That's really, really cool. Definitely a big fan of how this guy's come out. You can see that body has also been a little bit more streamlined. It really does look nice. I'm a big fan of this Tylosaurus, and I like the pattern as well. The pattern is quite nice. But yeah, really, really awesome. So that's all the marine reptiles done. Let them swim off and do their thing. Next up, before we go next up, all these were done by Feilong as part of his aquatic remodels pack. Really did a wonderful job. But next up, we've got the return of someone pretty cool. We've got TL Carib, or I'll just say TLK, who did a Gigantospinosaurus. So we got this really cool guy here. This is Gigantospinosaurus, another one of those cool Asian stegosaurs. See if we can get a good one. Let's see. Well, have a look at you. You look cool. You get a good view of you. We can see the Gigantospinosaurus. So you can see very reminiscent of like that group of Asian stegosaurs. Look really, really interesting. We'll start off with the head as well. These guys we don't really have a full head, but we have a bottom jaw. These guys likely had a very kind of boxy, long skull like that, very similar to other stegosaurs of its relatives. Very much adapted for eating plants and things like that, very much similar in that regard. And kind of a shorter neck, though it could eventually have a little bit of a longer neck. We don't know too much about this guy, though there is a lot preserved. The neck's pretty well preserved. It showed it potentially about this long, which is quite cool. And they also, as you can see here, changes to the feet. We'll go to the feet. They only really had the 3 toes with nails, and the 4 and 5th were kind of hiding out like that. But you can see that's very much rounded, very accurate to what stegosaurs would have looked like. Really changed the feet. And you can see the back ones here are kind of the same. You actually see the footprint changes there. Those big toes are kind of gone now. You can see they're made a little bit more elephant-like in that regard, or tortoise-like. And then you can see on the back here that giant spine. That giant spine's definitely been changed quite a bit. We really don't know. Some people like to orientate it differently. These guys kind of went for the up interpretation. Some put it to the side. But it has this really huge flared base, which is really interesting. And you can kind of see in there, big flared base that hang out on the shoulder blades. And whether way you decide to interpret it, like up here or potentially going out like that, I think it looks really nice. You can also see some changes to the plates here. They had very triangle plates along the neck, and then they kind of round out until they get to like a little bit spiky over here. and then they go either rounded or even lose them down the tail here. Just depends on your reconstruction. But yeah, came out really nice. And they also have the Thagomisers here. The 4 Thagomisers, very similar to Stegosaurus itself, but I know there's some with even found up to 6 Thagomisers. From Gigantospinosaurus, we don't have Thagomisers, so 6 may be potentially possible. We just don't know. But we can also see that tail's also been made a little bit longer, made much more powerful. Very, very cool. We can also see here the legs have changed, very much wide. Stegosaurs have very, very wide hips, and they got those very strong columnar legs to help support their body weight. But yeah, really, really cool. Very wide, thick animals. Definitely a big fan. So we're going to let you go off and do your own thing. TLK really did a wonderful job with these guys. Definitely a big fan of that. So come on, we want you to move out so we can grab our little friends that we got next. So next up, we have got Drepanosaurus by Dicerba. Dicerba returning for a little bit and giving us a very interesting animal, as we'll get into. So these little guys here, this is a little guy called Drepanosaurus, which means sickle lizard. So these guys were a little group of arboreal or tree-dwelling reptiles from the Jurassic period, and they are the member of the Drepanosauridae, which is a group of diapsid reptiles that are known for prehensile tails you kind of see there. And Drepanosaurus is known by its huge claw. You can see that index finger. It's actually pretty well known. We really don't know the skull. But if it's similar to its relatives, it's almost like a very bird-like skull. And I think there's been a little bit of changes here to make it a little bit more distinct, but that's really cool. But one really weird thing about these guys is how they orientated their arms. They're very different arms compared to most other tetrapods. It's basically different from most other land animals. Its owner has actually been modified into like a crescent-shaped sight, so there's a lot of muscles there, with some larger, almost like carpal bones as well. And so these guys would have had larger muscles to be able to like dig and climb through trees and things like that. And it also is actually reminiscent of some dinosaurs like Novosaurus and Baryonyx, but it seems that these guys would have most likely had an ecology quite similar to today's modern pygmy anteaters. So these guys would have been kind of using their large claw to dig through bark to find insect prey. With some researchers actually seen more far-fetched, these guys may have been used to dig burrows, and there are Drepanosaurs that are believed to be dig burrows, but these guys were definitely much more of the tree type. You can see across their body as well, they've almost got this like hump to them. Very large. They would have probably been great for attaching muscles. And the sacral and caudal neural spines are very low, elongated. Their spines are elongated, so that would be for much bigger muscles, along with the bigger radius ulnar and also bigger humerus and all that to better support those large muscles. And the pelvis, as you can see, is also quite large as well. And you can see they've got this quite long tail. And Drepanosaurus itself even has this little claw on the end. It probably didn't hold it like this. It would have probably been very much like a chameleon in that regard, using it to hold on to things like chameleons or monkeys or pygmy anteaters, using that long tail with that claw to hold on while they're climbing through the trees. So this guy was discovered in, I believe, 1979. And was named by Giovanni Pino, which was a paleontologist and a museologist. And the scientific name is Drepanosaurus ungulatus, which means sickle lizard. And there's only one incomplete adult specimen has been found. And another partial skeleton was found in 2016 as well. So these guys are a group called the Drepanosauridae, which are Drepanopatomorphs, are sometimes also grouped with the Protorosauria, which may be paraphyletic, but these guys are definitely diapsid reptiles. And in terms of their ecology, these guys would have been insectivores, using their large claws to climb up trees and grab bark and things like that. Though, as I mentioned, has also been suggested to be a burrowing animal, but the flexible tail is definitely a thing that a lot of climbing or arboreal animals have, so it's much more likely that Drepanosaurus itself would have been much more adept at climbing and living like a pygmy anteater. But there are relatives of Drepanosaurus that were good diggers. Like I think I recently discovered Durabidex or something, or however you say it. But yeah, these guys were about 45 to 50 centimeters long, or about 18 to 20 inches, and spent most of their time in the trees, living like modern monkeys or chameleons, things like that. And they're actually much larger than most of its relatives, and more than double the length of its relative, Gigantospinosaurus. And most Drepanosaurs were thought to be tree-dwelling, though some, obviously, I mentioned, have been thought to be diggers as well. They occupied quite a few different ecologies. And Dinosaurs seems to have inhabited places where they were heavily forested, such as now northern Italy, and also been found in New Mexico as well, and as well as New Jersey, as well as a similar paleo environment. So during the time the world was in a great big continent called Pangaea, the supercontinent. So all the continents today were connected into one, and at that time, North America and Europe were connected. So basically, a Dinosaurus could climb or walk from Italy to New Mexico or New Jersey, which is very weird to think of now, but at the time they were both connected by land, and they were all the one continent, so it's very likely they could have done that. But yeah, really, really awesome. I do love this little Dinosaurus. Jasurba really likes giving us weird out the field things, and I do love them. So look at these little guys. Let's have a look at these little goobers. Little goobers. Let them walk, do their thing. Definitely a big fan of these little guys. So let these guys run off and do their thing. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Come on, come on, come on. Do it for me. So next up, we have got another really interesting animal. This one's done by Master Dude. We have got Sillosuchus. It's a very interesting animal. So this is Sillosuchus. So these guys are not dinosaurs, believe it or not, though they very much look like dinosaurs. They are a Shuvasaurid, Poposaurid archosaur, so they are a member of the Archosauromorphs. So they're related to crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs, but they're in their own little group. These guys are in their own group in the Poposauridae, and it's believed they're more closely related to today's crocodiles. They have a lot more features, like being bipedal, and they have dinosaur-like hips and skull structures. So very much breaking the trend. They were almost like the dinosaurs before the dinosaurs, which is quite cool. But based on skull remains, these guys were most likely herbivores, and they had beaks. And the holotype of Sillosaurus was found in Argentina, which is in the Ulugasho Formation. And the skeleton has vertebrae, ribs, shoulder girdle, things like that. And the generic name comes from Suchus, so William Sul, so Sillosuchus, and the Greek word crocodile. So basically the Dr. William Sul crocodile. And the specific name, which is Longi cervix, or Longi, not cervix, cervix, which refers to the long cervical vertebrae that they have, a little bit longer neck, which is quite similar to other Shuvasaurids. Later studies showed that this neck was actually long compared to most Pseudosuchians, and it was actually par for the course for Shuvasaurids. And a reconstruction of this guy has actually been presented a while ago in honor of Dr. William de Vilchil, and there's an important promoter of paleontology in San Juan. And these guys are the only named genus of bipedal Poposaurid currently known from outside North America, and other relatives include Ephigenia and Poposaurus and Shuvasaurus, and which is quite interesting. But there's an individual specimen that we know, and we'll get into this. The individual specimen is believed to belong to an animal that was about 3 meters long, so much smaller than this guy. But however, the remains indicate that they could actually grow much, much larger. And there's other remains being found, like an isolated cervical vertebrae, that was actually originally misidentified as the predator Saurosuchus, which was a Rarasuchian, so related to animals like Postosuchus. This bone was about 27 meters long, while the cervicals of the holotype were only about 8 centimeters. Well, the cervical vertebrae are obviously the vertebrae of the neck. And Using more complete remains to estimate the length, it's believed that this Sillosuchus individual was about 9 to 10 meters long, or about 30 to 33 feet long, so which would actually make it one of the largest, or among the largest, terrestrial pseudosuchians, or crocodile line archosaurs at the time, which is so interesting. And also, these guys actually have a lot of unique features compared to their relatives. They also have large pockets on their side of their vertebrae and neck and back vertebrae, which is really interesting. And they have, as I mentioned, they have very much hips and stuff, very more similar to that of dinosaurs, which they're not that closely related to compared to a lot of other things. More similar to dinosaurs in that regard. And one thing about this guy is that they would have walked around most likely plantigrade. So most dinosaurs, pretty much all dinosaurs, are digigrade. So they pretty much walk on their toes. Plantigrade, they would have been walking on their heels as well. So if this was 100% correct, I believe it's just because of the animation, this is based off baryonyx, that would have been on the ground as well, and they look almost kind of weird, but you can see how interesting that is. And it really shows, like, there's a lot of weird things in the Jurassic, and they're not really often talked about, but I do love these guys very much. Sillosuchus is a very interesting animal, definitely a big fan. Really, really cool. Master Dude did a wonderful job with that. And Master Dude has also done a few other mods that we're going to get into. So next up, we have got another one of their mods. We have got their Megaraptor. Look at this wonderful guy here. So this is Megaraptor. This guy is a genus of large theropod that came from the late Cretaceous of Argentina, and was actually originally thought to be a giant dromaeosaur, and then was also classified as an allosauride, but most recently is actually now considered a Megaraptoran, so related to animals like Australovenator and things like that. And these guys, as I mentioned, was also originally described as a dromaeosaur, so that giant claw that was thought to be a sickle claw from the foot of a giant raptor. Estimated this guy could have been quite big, but then it actually found a complete limb, and it showed that these guys were actually had these large dew claws on their fingers. And they estimate the size of this guy was about 8 meters, or about 26 feet, and weighed about a ton. And the hand is also unusually elongated when bearing a sickle claw, and it's actually very similar to those of Spinosaurids, which they're not that closely related to. So the hand that was found is quite distinct among basal tetanurans, and it was not actually known whether it was like an allosaurid or a Gigantospinosaurus or whatever. But after being kind of thrown around, these guys were kind of neovenatids and things like that. And then a juvenile specimen found in 2014 provided more evidence between it being a primitive kind of tyrannosaurid, and the discovery of Gualacho actually showed it may not be a tyrannosaurid, but an allosaurid or basosaurolosaur. But most recently, they've also been shown to be a megaraptorid, so they're related to animals such as Australovenator, Aestodon, Ocororaptor, and things like that. But in 2022, with the description of Mape, they actually showed that there's kind of two clades within the Megaraptorans. There's kind of the South American, or the rest of the Megaraptorans that live from like Asia and Australia. That includes things like Raptor and Australovenator, known as Clade A, because these clades haven't been named it. And then another clade of entirely South American Megaraptors that were larger, that includes Maip, but also includes other guys as well. Megaraptor itself was considered Clade A, which was a little bit more basal, and then Clade B includes things that are later, like Aestodon, Maip, and Transyedular, and Ocororaptor, things like that, which is quite interesting. But these guys lived a little bit earlier in the Cretaceous. These guys would have been from the late Tenorian of Argentina. They would have lived with animals such as Fucolongosaurus, Unidlagia, Alvarezsaurids like Patagonicus, and also like Abelisaurids and things like that. Also, there were lots of ornithopods, Noasaurids, and lots of fish and birds and things like that. But a really interesting animal regardless. I'm a big fan of Megaraptor. Cool animal. Nice to also see some more animals from coming all over the world instead of just Europe and North America, some from South America and Australia and things like that. But next up, we've got something from China that we all know and love. Really cool dinosaur I love talking about, Master Dude. Also done this one. We have got Yutyrannus. So this is Yutyrannus. Really, really cool animal here. You really jumped ahead, but we'll have a look at you since you're probably the prettiest one. I like that red face. No, we'll have a look at you since you've got the best colors. Or best posture, I mean. But we have got Yutyrannus, which means feathered tyrant. These guys are a proserrated tyrannosaurid dinosaur, which is known from the single species Yutyrannus huai. And this guy lived in the early Cretaceous of northeastern China. And his fossils all been found in Liang province. And one of the cool things about Yutyrannus is the largest dinosaur that is direct evidence of feathers in their fossil. So we know that dinosaurs this guy's quite big, about 9 meters long. Even some pretty big dinosaurs had some feathers. So this guy was named and scientifically described in 2012 as the feathered tyrant. So what is in Mandarin. And they're known from like 3 nearly complete fossils, which includes an adult, a subadult, and a juvenile. They were all acquired by a fossil dealer in a single quarry in the Liang province. And it seems these guys were found in the Yixian Formation, which is a quite prolific formation that gives us lots of feathered dinosaurs and lots of cool animals, from the Aptian stage about 125 million years ago. And the holotype is the largest specimen, and there's a slab with an adult individual, and the other 2 are slightly smaller. And in terms of its description here, these guys were large bipedal predators. The largest and oldest specimen known is about 9 meters long, or about 29 feet long, and has weighed a little bit more than a ton, or about 1.5 tons, really, that kind of size. But the skulls of the paratypes are about 80 centimeters or 31 inches, and 60 centimeters, 25 inches, and weighed between 596 and 593 kilograms. So those are the younger individuals. The older individual was likely 1.5 tons. These guys have some really interesting traits. They also have that like crest going on there. The postorbital bone is like upper hind corner from the eye socket as well. Some really interesting little features that help give us a better idea of what it's like. But in terms of feathers, because that's like one of the big thing about Yutyrannus, it's the feathered tyrant. So the specimens also contain quite direct evidence of feathers, as they have fossil imprints, and it shows that these guys had feathers that were up to about 20 centimeters long, or about 7.9 inches, and they were filamentous feathers. And because of the low quality of the preservation, it wasn't able to show that they were simple or compound feathers, or broad or narrow. But it's very likely that these guys had these feathers like very much stage 1 feathers, very much almost like filamentous fur. But while it's been known before the discovery of this guy, upon the description of Feilong, which had feathers, that early tyrannosaurids had filamentous feathers. This is kind of like the largest one known to have feathers, and a little later as well. So that's pretty cool. It teaches us a little bit more about dinosaurs. Based on the description of the feathers, it actually covered the whole body and may have been used for regulating temperature, because the Yixian was actually pretty cold, with average annual temperatures of about 10 degrees Celsius. And alternatively, if they were restricted to this region where they found, they may have actually been display structures as well. And the 2 adults have distinctive wavy crests on their snouts, which would have been used potentially for signaling. And the presence of feathers in these larger basal Tyrannosaurus also implied that later Tyrannosaurs could have feathers, even as adults, despite their size. That includes Gorgosaurus, Tarbosaurus, and Tyrannosaurus. But from what we have of skin impressions, it seems that these later Tyrannosaurs may have had scales instead of feathers, so they may have lost them independently. Or they may have had feathers that were not really noticeable, almost like elephant hair, and we just don't really see that because it didn't preserve well. But very interesting. Also could be large size. There's kind of a rule that's been talked about that if a dinosaur gets over 3 tons and has feathers, you kind of really lose the need for it. So potentially some larger animals from some lineages, like these large Tyrannosaurs, Dinosaurus, Dinocyrus, animals like that may have lost or may potentially lost most of their feathers over time, or potentially had reduced feathers, which is quite interesting. And it's also possible, it's been talked about, that these guys actually might not be true feathers, and they may be filamentous structures that are being ancestral state of feathers, which is quite interesting. So they might not be true feathers in that way, but that's obviously highly disputed, and a lot of research has kind of disproves this, but that's just something that's been suggested. In terms of its classification, it's in a group of Proceratosauridae, which is within the late Tyrannosaurus. So these are really early relatives. That includes things like Guanlong and Proceratosaurus. So these guys very likely had feathers. And even though they're Tyrannosaurs, they still have like the three fingers, and they have some kind of on their way to becoming the later. They're an early group split off from the Tyrannosaurids, but really cool. In terms of ontogeny, we know that these guys are the different growth stages, and during growth they had long legs as babies, and they kind of shrunk as they became juvenile, and they got more robust and deeper skulls as they aged. And according to a 2018 study, Yutyrannus actually had a simple hyoid bone. So that's the bone in your throat that's kind of free floating, and that supports the muscles of your tongue and your voice box. And it suggests that these guys had a flat tongue that was like a crocodile. And based on hyoid comparisons of other living and extinct archosaurs, it was actually determined that all archosaurs would have had fixed tongues, with the exception of birds, pterosaurs, and some certain ornithischians, which is quite interesting. And in terms of social behavior, and because of these three individuals of Yutyrannus were allegedly found together, they had been interpreted that these guys were pack hunters. But based on the presence of sauropod material, that could be true. They may have hunted them, or potentially died while hunting one. But people think, oh, that's kind of weird. There's actually a lot of evidence that could suggest that these guys may have been at least been living together, maybe not necessarily hunting together, but living together. There have been animals such as Mapusaurus, Albertosaurus, I believe even Tarbosaurus, that have been found in family groups with babies to adults. So they could potentially show that they were at least living together, or they must have doing something social together, which is quite interesting. I like the idea of people really interpreting kind of these as hunting, because we often think, oh, big dumb dinosaurs. But yeah, even a lot of modern crocodilians will hunt together, like Nile crocodiles will hunt together. And it's not as impossible as it sounds. They may have been hunting, and it's kind of happened too much to be a coincidence, as we have Yutyrannus with different growth stages dying together, along with Mapusaurus, along with Albertosaurus, and things like that. It's kind of hard to kind of wave that away as just, oh, they just died together. So there must be something to it. And but really, we do not know how they died exactly. They could have just died together. They may have been hunting. They may have just been walking and all got hit by a water, like a flood or a landslide or whatever, and got preserved. We really don't know that. But if these guys did prey on sauropods, because I believe they would have been preying on the sauropod like Titan, I believe that's the name. They would have been one of the few animals able to do so. The other being a as of yet undescribed large theropod known from a tooth that is embedded in the red of Titan, which was a titanosaur that lived in the Ixian Formation. But in terms of its paleoecology or paleoenvironment, as I mentioned, these guys lived in the Ixian Formation around the Luotian and Jinshu beds. They would have lived with dinosaurs such as Ptachosaurus, Cardiopteryx, Sinosauropteryx, and the Titan, and would have been a very rich environment that would have been very much comparable to like modern temperate rainforests of places such as British Columbia, which had a lot of seasonal changes due to temperature. But there would have been an environment full with also volcanic eruptions, because it's around volcanoes. Also, forest fires would have been common in this environment, and the environment would have been littered with bodies of water and coniferous plants, so things like pines and things like that. So very much comparable to the temperate rainforests of British Columbia, which is, I think, a pretty good comparison. And there would have been a lot of seasonal changes, things like that, but still really, really interesting. I do love Yutyrannus. And before we go, we can see this is kind of the old way of doing feathers. If you remember the Yutyrannus from the first game, they kind of just took the model and kind of added these flakes. They don't have the true fur yet, but there are feather mods in the works, so maybe we could get ourselves in the future a very nice, fully feathered Yutyrannus with the mods with the first shader that came obviously with the Dominion and Malta animals, so that'd be very interesting to see. But yeah, really cool so far. Masadude really did a wonderful job. I do like these guys so much. So yeah, let's watch them walk off. And I think this would be also a great place to end the video. So I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope you guys like and subscribe. I really hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe, and goodbye.